The forge was my sanctuary and my prison. Within its smoky confines, I found purpose in the rhythm of hammer against metal, in the dance of sparks that leapt from the anvil, in the transformation of cold, unyielding iron into tools of use and sometimes beauty. Master Thornton owned my body, but in the forge, my hands created with a skill that even he could not command. "Jonas, where are those new shoes for Demeter?" Master Thornton's voice cut through the steady percussion of my work. He stood at the entrance to the smithy, his imposing frame silhouetted against the South Carolina sunlight. I continued my measured strikes, finishing the pattern on the decorative hinge I was crafting before looking up. "Almost done with them, Master. Just need to cool and fit them." Thornton stepped into my domain, his eyes narrowing at the hinge in my hands. "What's this?" "I didn't authorize any ornamental work. For the new gate at the main house, Master," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Miss Eleanor requested it specifically." His daughter's name tempered his displeasure somewhat. "Well, finish Demeter's shoes first. That mare's worth more than 10 of you." "Yes, Master," I answered, setting aside the hinge and reaching for the horseshoes I had prepared earlier. At 42, I had spent 27 years as the plantation's blacksmith, having been apprenticed to old William when I was just 15. William had been a free black man, unusual in South Carolina, who worked under contract. He had taught me everything he knew before consumption took him. After his death, Master Thornton had decided not to hire another free smith. Why pay for what you could own? "And Jonas," Thornton added as he turned to leave, "I'll need chains made. 5 sets, heavy gauge. We've got new workers coming in next week." Chains. I despised making them more than anything else. Each link I forged was another bond for someone who looked like me, someone who would arrive here terrified and disoriented, torn from whatever life they had known before. "Yes, Master," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. As Thornton's footsteps receded, I returned to the horseshoes, working with practiced efficiency. The mare's comfort was not my concern, but I took pride in my craft regardless of its purpose. Besides, animals were innocent in the hierarchies men created. The forge was separated from the other outbuildings, set at a distance from the main house and the slave quarters due to the fire risk. This isolation had been my blessing over the years. Here, I could work with minimal supervision, trusted because my skills were valuable and because until recently, I had been considered docile and reliable. As I worked the bellows to stoke the fire, my mind returned to the moment that had changed everything 3 months earlier. It had been an unusually hot day, even for South Carolina in July. I had been summoned to the main house to repair a broken bed frame in one of the guest rooms. As I worked, I heard a commotion from the adjacent room, Master Thornton's study. "Please, Master, she's just a child." The voice belonged to Naomi, who looked after the house slaves and had been on the plantation even longer than I had. "She's old enough," came Thornton's dismissive reply, "and she'll fetch a good price once she's proven she can breed." I froze, my hands still gripping the frame. They were discussing Lily, Naomi's 14-year-old granddaughter, who had recently been brought into the main house to serve as a maid to Miss Eleanor. "I'm begging you," Naomi pleaded, her voice breaking. "Don't send her to the breeding shed. Take me back instead. I've given you children before." Thornton laughed, a sound devoid of humor or humanity. "You're past your use for that, old woman. The girl goes tomorrow. Mitchell's already paid half the stud fee." I heard the distinctive sound of a slap, followed by Naomi's stifled sob. Then footsteps, coming toward the door of the room where I worked. I quickly returned my attention to the bed frame, pretending I had heard nothing as Thornton entered. "Finished yet, boy?" he demanded, though I was well into my 5th decade of life. "Nearly done, Master," I replied, keeping my eyes on my work. He stood watching me for a moment. "Make sure those joints are tight this time. Last repair didn't hold." "Yes, Master." As he left, I caught a glimpse of Naomi in the corridor beyond. Her cheek reddened from his blow, her eyes meeting mine briefly in a look of helpless desperation. That night, as I lay on my pallet in the small room attached to the forge where I slept, that look haunted me. Naomi had practically raised me after I was separated from my mother at age 10. She had tended my burns when I was learning the smithy's trade, had slipped me extra food when harvests were poor and rations were cut. And Lily, bright, gentle Lily, reminded me so much of my own daughter, Hannah, who had been sold away 5 years earlier when she turned 12. The breeding shed was a place of particular horror on the Thornton plantation. Young women sent there were expected to produce child after child, increasing the master's human property. The physical toll was devastating, but the spiritual and emotional destruction was even worse. Few emerged with their minds intact after years of such use. I rose from my pallet and stepped outside, needing air that wasn't tainted by the memory of Naomi's plea. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled silver filings. The slave quarters were dark, their occupants seeking what rest they could before another day of back-breaking labor in the fields. As I stood there, a plan began to form in my mind. Not fully realized, not yet, but the first sparks of an idea that would grow into an inferno. If I could not save Lily directly, perhaps there was another way to spare her the fate Thornton had decreed. The next morning I began my small acts of resistance. When making hinges for a new storage shed, I pocketed a small length of high-quality steel, not enough to be noticed in the inventory, but enough to begin. Over the following days and weeks, I collected more. Metal shavings that would normally be discarded, a broken file that still had a usable section, scraps of various sizes that I hid in a space beneath a loose floorboard in my sleeping quarters. During this time, Lily was indeed sent to the breeding shed, despite Naomi's tearful protests. The girl returned to the main house after a week, her eyes vacant, her movements mechanical. She no longer sang as she worked, no longer smiled at the small kindnesses some of us tried to offer her. Something essential had been broken in her, just as something had broken in me upon witnessing her suffering. It was then that my vague idea crystallized into a specific intention. The weapon I would create would not just be an instrument of escape or self-defense, it would be an instrument of justice, or perhaps vengeance. The line between the two had blurred in my mind. By day I continued my assigned work, making the tools that built Thornton's wealth, the shoes for his horses, the chains for his human property. By night, when the plantation was asleep, I would sometimes return to the forge and work on my secret project. The risk was enormous. A slave using the forge without permission would be severely punished, and what I was crafting would mean certain death if discovered. One evening, as I worked on my clandestine blade, the forge door creaked open. I quickly concealed the metal beneath a pile of scrap, heart pounding, expecting to see the master or one of his overseers. Instead, Naomi slipped inside, her thin frame seeming to fold in on itself with age and grief. "Jonas," she whispered, approaching cautiously. "What are you doing in here so late?" I hesitated, unsure whether to trust her with my secret. Naomi had always been careful, had always counseled patience and endurance rather than resistance. But the hollow look in her eyes since Lily's ordeal told me she might now view things differently. "I'm making something," I finally admitted. "Something that might help us." She glanced at the hidden pile of metal, then back at me. "Help us how?" "I don't know yet," I lied. I knew exactly what I intended, but couldn't bring myself to voice it, to make her complicit in what would surely be seen as the gravest of crimes. Naomi studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, be careful. Thornton's been drinking heavily lately. He's more dangerous when the spirits are in him." "I will," I promised. "You should go before someone notices you're here." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "Lily tried to take her own life yesterday," she said, her voice barely audible. "Miss Eleanor found her with a sheet around her neck." My hands clenched involuntarily. "Is she... she lives?" But Thornton had her whipped for damaging his property. Naomi's voice broke on the last word. 20 lashes. I counted each one. After she left, I returned to my work with renewed purpose, hammering with controlled fury, each strike a promise. The blade took shape beneath my hands, not ornate or beautiful like the decorative pieces I sometimes created for the main house, but functional, balanced, deadly in its simplicity. The blade was finished a month later, a knife with a 6-inch cutting edge, its handle wrapped in leather strips taken from a discarded harness. I hid it beneath the floorboards in my quarters, uncertain when or how I would use it, only knowing that its existence gave me something I had lacked for decades, a choice. The opportunity came sooner than I expected, on a cool October evening when the harvest was nearly complete. Master Thornton appeared at the forge just as I was banking the fires for the night, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "You," he slurred, pointing an unsteady finger at me. "You've been making defective equipment." I set down my tools carefully. "No, Master. Everything I make is tested before it leaves the forge." "Liar!" he shouted, advancing into the smithy. "Plow blade broke in the north field today. Lost hours of work because of your incompetence." I knew the blade he spoke of. It had been in use for 3 seasons and had been repeatedly repaired. I had warned the overseer that it needed replacing, but Thornton had refused to allocate the iron. "I'm sorry to hear that, Master," I replied evenly. "I'll forge a new one tomorrow." "You'll do it now," he demanded, swaying slightly. "I want it ready for first light." "Yes, Master," I agreed, though it would mean working through the night. "I'll need to prepare the forge again." He watched with bloodshot eyes as I rekindled the fire, his presence an oppressive weight in the space that had been my only sanctuary. As the flames began to rise, casting dancing shadows across the walls, he continued his tirade, criticizing my work, my appearance, my very existence. "Uppity," he muttered. "Always thought you were better than you are. My father should never have let old William teach you those fancy techniques." I said nothing, focusing on building the fire to the proper temperature. "You know what happened today?" he continued, settling himself on a stool near the door. "Mitchell came to collect on his breeding fee. Says the child Lily's carrying isn't developing right. Wants his money back." My hands faltered briefly as I arranged the coals. Lily was with child. No one had told me, though it explained why Naomi had looked even more careworn lately. "Said I should just get rid of her after she whelps," Thornton went on, taking a swig from a flask he pulled from his coat. "Not worth keeping if she can't produce healthy stock." Something shifted inside me then, a final barrier crumbling away. I straightened up from the forge, wiping my hands on my leather apron. "The fire needs time to reach proper heat," I said. "Perhaps you'd like to wait in your study, Master. I can send word when I'm ready to begin." He waved the suggestion away. "I'll wait. Want to make sure you do it right this time." I nodded, moving toward my tools as if to prepare them for the work ahead. Instead, I went to the small chest where I kept my personal items, a comb made of bone, a wooden cup, a few other permitted possessions. The false bottom of the chest concealed another hiding place, one I had created after becoming concerned that the space beneath my floorboards might be discovered. From this secret compartment, I withdrew my blade, slipping it into my sleeve while Thornton's attention was momentarily drawn to a noise outside. When I turned back to him, my decision was made. "Master Thornton," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to show you something in the back room. I think I found the problem with the metal from that batch." Drunk and curious, he followed me into the small storage area where raw materials and finished pieces awaiting collection were kept. As he peered at the pile of iron bars I indicated, I withdrew the blade from my sleeve and in one swift motion drove it into the base of his skull. His body stiffened, then collapsed. I caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him quietly. For a moment I stood over him, expecting to feel triumph or satisfaction or even remorse. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold clarity, as if I were observing the scene from a great distance. Thornton's eyes were still open, his expression one of mild surprise rather than pain or fear. I closed them with my fingertips, an oddly respectful gesture toward a man I had every reason to hate. Then I set about the practical matter of concealing what I had done. Behind the smithy was a storage pit, where we kept charcoal for the forge. It had recently been emptied in preparation for the new delivery. I dragged Thornton's body outside, checking first to ensure no one was about, and lowered it into the pit. Then I covered it with the small amount of remaining charcoal and a layer of dirt. Returning to the forge, I cleaned my blade meticulously, then hid it once more. I wiped away the few drops of blood on the storage room floor and checked my clothing for any telltale stains. Finding none, I banked the fire properly and prepared to return to my quarters as if nothing had happened. As I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face, I gazed up at the main house on the hill. Lights still burned in several windows. Miss Eleanor would be wondering why her father had not returned for the evening meal. The overseers would eventually organize a search when he failed to appear for morning inspections. They would not find him immediately. The charcoal pit was not an obvious place to look, and I had concealed the body well. But eventually, whether through my own error or simple bad luck, the truth would emerge. And when it did, the consequences would be dire, not just for me, but potentially for all the enslaved people on the plantation. Yet as I walked back to my quarters, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I had acted not as property, but as a man defending his community from a predator. Whatever came next, I had struck a blow against the system that had taken so much from me and those I cared for. I slept soundly that night, without dreams or disturbance, as if my conscience recognized what my mind perhaps could not fully admit, that sometimes justice requires blood. The search for Master Thornton began at dawn. His absence had been noted the previous evening, but it was not unusual for him to spend nights away from the main house. By morning, however, when his horse remained in the stable and no word had come from elsewhere, concern began to grow. I went about my duties as normal, stoking the forge, preparing for the day's work. The plough blade that Thornton had demanded remained unmade, a detail that would eventually be noticed, but one I hoped would be overlooked in the confusion of his disappearance. From my position at the smithy, I could observe much of the plantation's activity. Overseers gathered near the main house, receiving instructions from Thornton's son Charles, who had arrived from Charleston the previous week. Unlike his father, Charles Thornton was considered a gentleman of refinement, more interested in politics and society than in the day-to-day operations of the plantation. By midday, the search had expanded to include the fields, outbuildings, and the small creek that ran along the property's eastern boundary. Field hands were diverted from their regular tasks to form search parties, supervised closely by increasingly anxious overseers. No one came to the forge with new work orders, a small mercy that allowed me to concentrate on controlling my expressions and movements, betraying nothing of what I had done. As the afternoon wore on, Naomi appeared at the smithy door, her face tight with worry. "Jonas," she said softly, "they're saying Master Thornton might have met with foul play." I set down my hammer, wiping sweat from my brow. "What makes them think that?" "They found his flask by the forge," she replied, "and Master Charles says his father mentioned he was coming to speak with you last night." A chill ran through me despite the heat of the forge. I had not noticed the flask, a critical oversight. "He did come by," I acknowledged, keeping my voice steady. "Wanted a new plough blade made, but he left when I told him the fire was banked for the night and it would have to wait until morning." Naomi's eyes searched mine, looking for something. Truth or reassurance, I couldn't tell. "Jonas," she whispered, stepping closer, "if you know something." "I don't," I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. Naomi had been my friend, and something of a mother figure for decades. Deceiving her felt like a betrayal, but involving her would only put her in danger. She nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her expression. "They're bringing dogs," she said after a moment, "from the McDaniel plantation. Bloodhounds." The news sent another wave of cold fear through me. Dogs could track scents, could lead the searchers to the charcoal pit if any trace of Thornton's blood had spilled on the ground during the dragging of his body. "When?" I asked, trying to keep the urgency from my voice. "Tomorrow morning. Master Charles wanted them today, but McDaniel's away and his overseer wouldn't release them without permission. A day's reprieve, perhaps enough time to better conceal what I had done." After Naomi left, I forced myself to continue working on minor tasks, mending tools, shaping nails, anything to appear normal while my mind raced with plans and contingencies. When darkness fell, I would need to move Thornton's body to a more secure location, one the dogs would be less likely to find. The remainder of the day passed with excruciating slowness. Twice search parties passed by the forge, asking if I had seen anything unusual the previous night. I repeated my story. Thornton had come by, had been drinking, had left after learning the forge was closed for the evening. The consistency of my account seemed to satisfy them, at least temporarily. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plantation grounds, I noticed increased activity near the slave quarters. Overseers were conducting thorough searches of each cabin, upending pallets, checking beneath floorboards, examining personal possessions. They were looking for evidence, for anything that might explain the master's disappearance. My own quarters, attached to the smithy, would eventually be searched as well. The blade hidden in my chest's false bottom would need to be moved. But where? And what of Thornton's body? The charcoal pit suddenly seemed an absurdly obvious hiding place. Night finally fell, bringing with it a light rain that might help mask my movements. I waited until the last search party had returned to the main house before slipping out to the charcoal pit. The ground was damp, making the digging easier, but also increasing the risk of leaving noticeable disturbances. Working quickly by the light of a quarter moon, occasionally visible through the clouds, I uncovered Thornton's body. Death had already begun its work. The smell was noticeable but not yet overwhelming. I wrapped the body in an old piece of canvas I had taken from the smithy, then hoisted it onto my shoulder. The weight was substantial. Thornton had lived well on the fruits of others' labor, but my arms were strong from years at the forge. My destination was a section of the creek that cut through a dense thicket of brush and trees at the property's edge. The water was deep there, with a strong current after recent rains. If I weighted the body properly, it would be carried downstream, perhaps never to be found or at least discovered far from the plantation, where suspicion might fall elsewhere. I had gathered stones from around the forge, filling my pockets, and a small sack tied to my belt. These would help ensure the body sank and stayed submerged. The journey to the creek was tense, about half a mile through darkness, carrying a dead man's body, aware that discovery would mean my immediate execution. Twice I had to stop and hide as patrols passed nearby. The rain intensified, soaking through my clothing and the canvas shroud, making my burden heavier, but also reducing visibility for any who might be watching. By the time I reached the creek, my muscles were burning with exertion, and fear had dried my mouth despite the downpour. The water looked black in the darkness, its surface broken by raindrops and the rush of the current over submerged rocks. I waded in up to my waist, the cold shocking against my skin. With methodical care, I placed stones inside Thornton's clothing, securing them by tying strips of the canvas around his limbs and torso. When I was satisfied he would sink, I pushed the body into the deepest part of the creek and watched as the current took it, pulling it under and away into the night. I remained in the water for several minutes, letting the creek wash away any blood or other evidence that might have transferred to my clothing. Then I carefully retraced my steps to the charcoal pit, smoothing over the disturbed earth as best I could in the darkness. The rain would help erase any remaining signs of digging. By the time I returned to my quarters, I was exhausted but clear-headed. I changed into dry clothes, hiding the wet ones beneath my pallet to deal with later. The blade I relocated to a new hiding place, a small cavity I had previously created in one of the forge's support beams, concealed behind a loose brick. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every sound, the continuing rain on the roof, the distant barking of dogs at neighboring farms, the occasional voice of a patrolling overseer, jolted me back to alertness. When I did drift off, my dreams were filled with water and weight and the sensation of sinking into darkness. Dawn arrived with renewed activity. From my window, I could see the McDaniel bloodhounds being led onto the property, straining at their leashes, eager for the hunt. The handlers were given Thornton's clothing to scent the dogs, and the search began in earnest. I forced myself to eat a small breakfast of cornmeal mush, knowing I would need strength for whatever the day might bring. Then I opened the smithy for business as usual, lighting the forge, preparing tools, acting the role of the dutiful slave with no knowledge of his master's fate. By mid-morning, the dogs had led their handlers to the forge. I felt my heart race as they circled the building, noses to the ground, tracking the scent of the man I had killed. They showed particular interest in the area around the charcoal pit, pawing at the earth, whining with excitement. "Dig here," one of the handlers ordered, and 2 field hands stepped forward with shovels. I watched from the smithy door, struggling to maintain a neutral expression as they excavated the pit where Thornton's body had lain for nearly a day. They found nothing, of course, but the dogs remained agitated, continuing to signal that something significant had been there. Charles Thornton approached me, his face grave beneath the wide brim of his hat. Unlike his father, he addressed me directly and with a modicum of respect. "Jonas, the dogs seem quite interested in this area. Can you explain why?" "I buried some animal remains there recently, Master Charles," I replied, the lie coming more easily than I expected. "A raccoon that had been getting into the forge at night, didn't want it attracting more vermin." He studied me for a moment, his eyes, so like his father's, searching for deception. "When my father came to see you night before last, what was his demeanor?" "He seemed upset, Master Charles, about a broken plough blade, and he had been drinking." "Was anyone else present during your conversation?" "No, sir, just the 2 of us." Charles nodded slowly. "And he left here in which direction?" I gestured vaguely toward the main road. "That way, I believe, though it was getting dark, and I returned to my quarters shortly after he departed." The questioning continued, but I maintained my story with a consistency born of both preparation and the partial truth it contained. Eventually, Charles seemed satisfied, or at least resigned to learning nothing more from me. The dogs were led away to continue their search elsewhere, though one handler remained behind. studying the ground around the charcoal pit with narrowed eyes. I returned to my work, aware that suspicion had not been entirely dispelled. That evening, as the search parties returned empty-handed for the second consecutive day, a new complication arose. Rebecca, a young woman from the household staff who had often been subjected to Thornton's unwanted attentions, was brought to the main house for questioning. From my vantage point at the forge, I could see her being escorted by two overseers, her posture rigid with fear. Hours passed before she emerged. When she did, her face was tear-stained, her clothing disheveled. One of the overseers gripped her arm tightly as they walked her back to the slave quarters. I learned what had transpired from Naomi, who came to the forge just before sunset, her expression even more troubled than before. "They questioned Rebecca for hours," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the main house. "Accused her of knowing something about Master Thornton's disappearance, said she had reason to want him gone." "Did she?" I asked, though I knew the answer. Rebecca, like many of the younger women on the plantation, had suffered Thornton's predatory behavior. Naomi's lips thinned. "Of course she did, but she knows nothing. They threatened her, Jonas. Threatened to sell her children if she didn't tell them what they wanted to hear." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. What did she say? Nothing at first, but then Naomi hesitated, her eyes finally meeting mine directly. "Then she told them she'd seen you and Master Thornton arguing violently the night he disappeared. Said she heard you threaten him." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "That's a lie," I said automatically. "Why would she say such a thing?" "To protect herself, to protect her children." Naomi's voice held no judgment, only a deep weariness. "They were going to make someone pay for this, Jonas. Better you than her babies." In her mind, I understood the calculation Rebecca had made. In her position, facing the loss of her children, I might have done the same, but understanding did not lessen the danger her accusation had placed me in. "What happens now?" I asked, though I could guess the answer. "They're coming for you," Naomi confirmed. "Not yet. Master Charles wants to gather more evidence first. But soon." I nodded, my mind already turning to escape plans, evaluating options, calculating risks. "Thank you for warning me." She reached out suddenly, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Did you do it, Jonas? Did you kill Master Thornton?" I looked into her eyes, eyes that had seen decades of suffering, that had witnessed the abuse of her granddaughter, that held no love for the man who had disappeared. "Would it matter if I did?" I asked softly. A complex emotion crossed her face. Fear, understanding, perhaps even approval. "No," she finally whispered, "but it matters what happens to you now." After she left, I began preparations. Escape had never been a realistic option before. Blacksmiths were valuable property, closely monitored despite the relative freedom my position afforded me. But with Thornton gone, and suspicion falling on me, remaining meant certain death. I gathered what few possessions might prove useful. A fire striker, a small knife used for detail work, not the blade that had ended Thornton's life, which I decided to leave hidden. A water skin. Food would be a problem, but I had gone hungry before and could do so again if it meant freedom. As night descended, I continued working in the forge, wanting to appear normal to any watching eyes. Inside, however, I was saying goodbye to the place that had been both my prison and my sanctuary for most of my life. The heat of the forge, the smell of hot metal, the satisfying weight of the hammer in my hand, these sensations had defined my existence for so long that leaving them behind felt almost like losing a part of myself. But what awaited me if I stayed was far worse than any loss of familiar routine. Rebecca's accusation would be enough, especially coupled with the dog's interest in the charcoal pit and Thornton's known visit to the forge on the night of his disappearance. They would question me again, more forcefully this time. They might bring in the local magistrate, might employ methods designed to extract confessions regardless of truth. And when, they determined I was responsible for Thornton's disappearance, the punishment would be swift and terrible. Public execution, most likely, preceded by torture, meant to serve as a warning to others who might contemplate similar acts of rebellion. I had just decided to make my escape that very night, while the confusion and search efforts were still focused elsewhere, when the smithy door burst open. 3 men entered, the head overseer, Williams, and 2 others I recognized as part of the plantation's security force. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know. "Jonas," Williams said, his hand resting meaningfully on the whip at his belt. Master Charles wants to speak with you up at the house. I set down my hammer carefully, mind racing. Of course, let me just bank the fire. Now, Williams insisted, moving closer. The fire can wait. I nodded, removing my leather apron with deliberate slowness, trying to project calm while inwardly cursing my hesitation. I should have fled hours ago as soon as Naomi brought her warning. They escorted me toward the main house, one man in front, two behind, their vigilance making it clear they considered me dangerous. As we walked, I noted the positions of other overseers and house slaves, mapping potential escape routes, assessing my chances if I were to break away and run. The odds were poor. Even if I managed to overpower my immediate escorts, the plantation was on high alert. Mounted riders could easily overtake me before I reached the property boundary, and beyond that boundary lay a state where every white face would be an enemy, where runaways were hunted with methodical efficiency. We reached the main house, its windows glowing with lamplight against the gathering darkness. I was led not to the study where I had occasionally been summoned in the past to discuss specialized ironwork, but to a small room at the rear of the house that had sometimes served as a holding cell for slaves awaiting punishment. "Wait here," Williams ordered, pushing me inside. "Master Charles will come when he's ready." The door closed behind him, and I heard the distinctive sound of a key turning in the lock. The room was bare except for a wooden bench along one wall and a slop bucket in the corner. A single small window, covered with iron bars I had likely forged myself, admitted little light or air. I sat on the bench, hands resting on my knees, and waited. The irony of my situation was not lost on me. The man who had created so many of the bonds that held others captive was now himself imprisoned, awaiting judgment for striking a blow against those same bonds. Hours passed. I heard the household settling for the night, the diminishing sounds of movement, the eventual quiet broken only by the occasional voice of a patrolling overseer or the distant barking of dogs. Still, no one came. I realized this was intentional, a tactic to increase my anxiety, to wear down my resistance before questioning began. I had seen it used before on others, had heard the screams that eventually followed, but knowing the strategy did not make it less effective. As the night deepened, so did my dread of what morning would bring. Near midnight, the door finally opened. Charles Thornton entered, followed by an unfamiliar man in a fine suit who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This is the blacksmith?" the stranger asked, studying me with cold eyes. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove," Charles confirmed. "Jonas has been with the plantation since he was a boy. My father considered him one of our most valuable assets." Hargrove, I had heard the name mentioned among the overseers, a man known for his skill in extracting confessions from recalcitrant slaves. "Stand up," Hargrove ordered. I rose slowly, keeping my expression neutral despite my racing heart. "Do you know why you're here, boy?" he asked, circling me like a predator. "No, sir," I replied, the lie automatic. Hargrove smiled thinly. "I think you do." He nodded to Williams, who produced a familiar object, the flask Thornton had been drinking from the night I killed him. "This was found near the forge," Charles said, "and a witness places you in an altercation with my father on the night he disappeared." I remained silent, understanding that anything I said would only strengthen their case against me. "We also found blood," Hargrove added, watching my face closely for a reaction. "On the ground behind the smithy. Not much, but enough for the dogs to detect." This was unexpected. I had been careful, had thought the rain would wash away any traces. "The creek is being searched as we speak," Charles continued. "The dogs led us there before losing the scent. If my father's body is found," he let the implication hang in the air between us. "I didn't kill Master Thornton," I said evenly, meeting his gaze. "I last saw him at the forge, as I told you. He was angry about the plow blade, but he left alive." Hargrove chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "They always deny it at first," he said to Charles, "but they break eventually. They all do." Charles looked uncomfortable, but did not contradict him. "My mother returns from Charleston tomorrow," he said instead. "She wants to be present when justice is served. So I had one more night, one night before whatever methods Hargrove employed to extract confessions would be used on me. One night before Thornton's widow returned, undoubtedly thirsting for vengeance. "Secure him properly," Hargrove instructed Williams. "I'll begin my work in the morning." After they left, Williams and his assistant shackled my ankles to a metal ring embedded in the floor. Another piece of my own craftsmanship turned against me. My wrists were bound behind my back, the rope tight enough to cut into my skin. "You should have run when you had the chance, Jonas," Williams said as he checked the restraints. There was something almost like regret in his voice. Unlike many overseers, Williams had always been professional rather than cruel, enforcing rules without seeming to take pleasure in punishment. Would I have made it, I asked, genuinely curious about his assessment. He shrugged. Probably not, but you'd have died free at least. After they left, I tested my bonds, finding them secure but not impossible to escape given time and determination. The shackles on my ankles were of my own making. I knew their weaknesses, knew how the locking mechanism functioned. The rope around my wrists was standard plantation issue, strong but not impervious to friction against a rough surface. But even if I freed myself from these immediate restraints, I would still be trapped in a locked room in a house full of people on a plantation patrolled by armed men. Escape seemed impossible. As the night wore on, exhaustion finally overcame fear, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of water and weight and the sensation of metal yielding beneath my hammer. I woke suddenly to the sound of the key turning in the lock. Dawn light filtered weakly through the barred window, signaling the arrival of what would likely be my last day. But it wasn't Hargrove or Charles who entered. It was Lily, Naomi's granddaughter, carrying a tray with a small portion of food and water. Her eyes were downcast, her movements tentative. The vibrant girl she had been before being sent to the breeding shed was gone, replaced by this hollow-eyed shadow. "Lily," I whispered, surprised to see her. "You shouldn't be here." She set the tray down on the bench beside me, then glanced nervously at the door. "Grandmother sent me," she murmured. "Said to tell you she's working on something. Said to be ready when the time comes." Hope flickered faintly within me. "Ready for what?" Lily shook her head. "I don't know. She just said to tell you that." She hesitated, then added, "And to give you this." From a pocket in her apron, she withdrew a small metal file, the kind used for detail work in the forge. I stared at it in disbelief. "How did she get this?" "From your tools. The overseers aren't watching the forge now that you're here." Lily placed the file beside me on the bench, concealing it beneath the edge of the tray. "She said you'd know what to do with it." Before I could respond, the door opened again and Williams entered. Lily immediately adopted a servile posture, head bowed, hands clasped before her. "That's enough," Williams said gruffly. "Back to your duties, girl." Lily nodded and hurried out, not meeting my eyes again. Williams watched her go, then turned to me with a frown. "Eat," he ordered, gesturing to the tray. "Hargrove will be here soon, and he prefers his subjects to have some strength, makes the process last longer." After he left, I maneuvered my bound hands to reach the file, slipping it into my sleeve for later use. Then, awkwardly, I managed to eat some of the cornbread and drink a little water, knowing I would indeed need strength for whatever lay ahead. The file represented a chance, however slim. If Naomi was truly working on something, perhaps there was a plan for my escape. But what could an elderly house slave arrange that would overcome the formidable obstacles to freedom? I didn't have long to ponder this question. Within the hour, Hargrove returned, accompanied by Williams and two other men carrying a disturbing array of implements. They hung a lantern from a hook in the ceiling, casting harsh light throughout the small room. "Remove his shirt," Hargrove instructed, and Williams complied, cutting away the fabric with a knife rather than untying my hands. What followed was a methodical application of suffering. Hargrove was skilled in his terrible craft, knowing precisely how to inflict maximum pain while minimizing the risk of unconsciousness or death. He asked the same questions repeatedly. Where was Thornton's body? Why had I killed him? Who had helped me dispose of the evidence? Varying only the methods of persuasion. I said nothing beyond continued denials. Each time the pain intensified, I retreated deeper into my mind, focusing on memories of my wife before illness took her, of Hannah as a small child learning to walk, of the rare moments of beauty or connection that had punctuated my enslaved existence. Time lost meaning in that lantern-lit room filled with pain. Eventually, Hargrove stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Stubborn," he remarked to Williams, "but they all break eventually." He glanced at the window, noting the position of the sun. "Mrs. Thornton's carriage has been sighted on the road. We'll resume after she's had a chance to confront him." They left me then, a broken, bleeding thing on the floor of that small room. But they had made a critical error. In their confidence that I was too weakened to attempt escape, They had not resecured the shackles that had been removed during the interrogation. My ankles were free, though my wrists remained bound. Once alone, I forced myself to move despite the agony that accompanied each shift of position. I retrieved the file from where it had fallen from my sleeve during the questioning and began the slow, painful process of sawing through the rope that bound my wrists. It was painstaking work, made more difficult by my injuries and awkward angle, but the file was sharp, and desperation lent strength to my efforts. By the time I heard the distant sound of carriage wheels on the drive, presumably Mrs. Thornton returning, the rope was nearly severed. With a final effort, I broke free, bringing my arms forward for the first time in hours. The relief was immediate, but short-lived. I was still trapped in a locked room, still surrounded by enemies, still marked for death. I examined the lock, another product of my craft. With the proper tools, I could have picked it easily, but the file was too thick for such delicate work. I would have to wait for someone to open it, then attempt to overpower them and flee. A desperate plan with little chance of success given my weakened state. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the barred window, I heard footsteps approaching. I quickly returned to my position on the floor, arranging the severed rope to give the appearance that my wrists were still bound, concealing the file beneath my leg. The door opened, and Charles Thornton entered, followed closely by an elegant woman in mourning black, his mother, Mrs. Eleanor Thornton. Her face was composed, revealing little emotion beyond a certain hard determination in her eyes. "This is him?" she asked, her voice cultured but cold. "Yes, mother. Our blacksmith, Jonas." She approached, studying me with the detached interest one might show a curiosity in a museum. "He doesn't look capable of overpowering Alfred. Hargrove believes he took him by surprise," Charles explained. "Perhaps struck him from behind." Mrs. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "And the body?" "Still searching the creek. The dogs led us there, but the current has been strong after the recent rains." She turned her attention fully to me then. "Why?" she asked simply. "Alfred valued your skills. You were treated better than most." I remained silent, seeing no benefit in engaging with her questions. Anything I said would only feed their certainty of my guilt. "Answer Mrs. Thornton," Charles demanded, his voice hardening. When I still didn't respond, Mrs. Thornton sighed. "It doesn't matter. The evidence is sufficient." She turned to her son. "I wish to see justice done before I return to Charleston, tomorrow at dawn." "Yes, mother. Hargrove suggests a public execution as a warning to the others." "Of course. Have Williams make the arrangements." They left without further acknowledgement of my presence, discussing the details of my execution as casually as they might discuss the menu for dinner. The door locked behind them, and I was alone once more with the knowledge that I had until dawn to escape or die. Night fell, bringing a strange calm. I had done what I could with the file, freeing my wrists and testing various potential weaknesses in the room's security. None had yielded. Now I could only wait and hope that Naomi's mysterious plan would manifest before morning arrived, with its promise of death. Hours passed. The house grew quiet as its inhabitants retired for the night. Occasionally, I heard the footsteps of a guard passing in the hallway outside my door, Williams taking no chances despite my apparent helplessness. It was well past midnight when I detected a new smell. Smoke, faint but unmistakable. At first I thought it might be my imagination, a phantom scent conjured by a mind stretched to breaking. But it grew stronger, accompanied soon after by shouts of alarm from somewhere within the house. "Fire! Fire in the east wing!" Footsteps pounded in the hallway as guards and house slaves rushed to respond to the emergency. I moved to the window, straining to see what was happening. Orange flames were visible from the far side of the house, reaching hungrily toward the night sky. This then was Naomi's plan, a desperate, dangerous gambit that put everyone on the plantation at risk. Fire was the great fear of every wooden structure, capable of destroying in minutes what had taken years to build. It was a terrible weapon, but perhaps the only one available to an old woman with few resources beyond her own courage and determination. I positioned myself beside the door, file gripped tightly in my hand. A poor weapon, but the only one I had. If someone came to move me because of the fire, I would have a chance, perhaps my only one. The wait was brief. Within minutes, the key rattled in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal Williams, his face tense in the light of the lantern he carried. "Out," he ordered tersely. "Quickly. The fire's spreading faster than we can contain it." I feigned greater weakness than I felt, stumbling as I rose, forcing him to step closer to steady me. As he did, I drove the file into his shoulder with all the strength I could muster. He cried out, dropping the lantern, which shattered on the floor and immediately set the spilled oil ablaze. William staggered back, clutching his wound. I pushed past him into the hallway, which was already filling with smoke. The fire Naomi had set in the east wing was clearly spreading rapidly, aided perhaps by strategically placed accelerants. I ran toward the rear of the house, encountering panicked house slaves but no overseers. All able-bodied men were likely fighting the fire. The smoke grew thicker, making it difficult to see and breathe. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Mrs. Thornton shouting orders, her composure finally broken by the threat to her home. The kitchen door stood open, staff fleeing with whatever valuables they could carry. I joined the exodus, head down, just another shadow in the chaos. Outside, the night air was a blessing after the smoke-filled house, though even here ash and embers swirled on the wind. The main house was now fully engulfed, flames leaping from windows, the structure groaning as timbers weakened. In the firelight, I could see figures running in all directions, house slaves, field hands drawn by the commotion, overseers attempting to maintain some semblance of order. No one paid attention to a single man slipping away toward the tree line. I had nearly reached the relative safety of the woods when a voice called out behind me, "Jonas!" I turned to see Lily standing there, a small bundle in her arms. Behind her, silhouetted against the burning house, was Naomi. "Grandmother said to give you this," Lily said, pressing the bundle into my hands. "Food, a water skin, and this." She produced a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "Taken from the house during the confusion." I stared at the old woman who had risked everything to create this opportunity. "Naomi, they'll know it was you. They'll do nothing," she interrupted, her voice stronger than I had heard it in years. "An old woman like me? What would I know of setting fires?" She gestured toward the burning plantation house. "They'll blame you for this too. Another act of revenge. It doesn't matter now." I wanted to thank her, to somehow express what her sacrifice meant, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, I embraced her briefly, then Lily. "Go," Naomi urged. "North. Follow the North Star. There are people who will help if you can reach the border. Come with me," I pleaded, though I knew it was impossible. Naomi was too old for such a journey, and Lily's pregnancy would make travel dangerous. Naomi shook her head. "Our place is here for now. Perhaps someday—" She didn't finish the thought. "Go, before they start searching. Dawn isn't far off." With a final nod of gratitude and farewell, I turned and disappeared into the woods, the glow of the burning plantation at my back, the uncertain path to freedom ahead. The woods offered temporary shelter, but I knew I couldn't linger. By dawn, once the fire was contained, they would discover my absence and begin the hunt. South Carolina was unforgiving territory for fugitive slaves. Every white face a potential enemy, every road patrolled, every river crossing watched. I moved deeper into the forest, using the stars for navigation as Naomi had advised. North, always north, toward the free states where, if I was extraordinarily fortunate, I might find sanctuary. But the journey would be measured in hundreds of miles, not hours or even days. The bundle Lily had given me contained cornbread, dried meat, a small pouch of parched corn, and a water skin. Provisions for perhaps 3 days, if carefully rationed. The leather pouch held $6 silver and a few smaller coins. A fortune by the standards of an enslaved person, but far from enough to buy passage on a northbound ship, which would have been the fastest route to freedom. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, I found a dense thicket in which to conceal myself during daylight hours. Travel by night would be slower but safer, reducing the chance of encountering slave patrols or being spotted by farmers or travelers who would quickly report a black man moving alone through the countryside. From my hiding place, I could see smoke still rising from the direction of the Thornton plantation. The main house was likely destroyed, though the outbuildings, including my forge, might have been saved if the bucket brigades had worked quickly enough. I felt a strange mixture of regret and satisfaction at the sight. The forge had been my prison, but also my sanctuary, the source of both my bondage and my pride. I slept fitfully during the day, waking at every sound, a deer moving through the underbrush, birds calling to one another, the distant barking of dogs that might or might not be on my trail. The forest, usually a place of relative peace, now seemed filled with potential threats. As dusk approached, I prepared to move again. The North Star would be my guide, but I needed to parallel roads rather than cross open country if I wanted to make good time. This strategy carried its own risks. Roads meant people and people meant danger, but without them, I would soon be lost in unfamiliar territory. I had just emerged from my hiding place when I heard voices approaching, white men, from the sound of them, moving with purpose through the gathering darkness. The dogs lost the scent at the creek again, one was saying. Just like with the old man. Could have gone in either direction from there, another replied. We'll split up at the ford, half upstream, half down. They were close, perhaps 50 yards away, though invisible through the dense vegetation. I froze, barely breathing as they passed nearby. You really think he killed Thornton? A third voice asked. Jonas always seemed steady to me. Quiet ones are the worst, the first voice answered. Harbor grudges for years, then snap. Besides, where's Thornton if he didn't kill him? Man doesn't just disappear. Their voices faded as they moved away, but the encounter left me shaken. They were actively searching, and with dogs. My plan to follow the creek north would have led me directly into their path. I needed a new strategy. If they were watching the waterways, I would have to find another route north. Perhaps I could circle west, away from the search parties, then turn north again once I was well clear of the immediate area. For 3 nights, I traveled in this manner, resting during daylight hours in whatever concealment I could find. Dense thickets, abandoned structures, once even a cave-like depression beneath the roots of a fallen tree. My provisions dwindled more quickly than I had hoped, the physical demands of constant movement and vigilance requiring more sustenance than my careful rationing had allowed for. On the 4th night, I reached a small settlement, little more than a crossroads with a general store, a blacksmith shop, which I noted with professional interest despite my circumstances, and a handful of modest homes. Under normal conditions, I would have avoided such a place entirely, but my water was nearly gone, and hunger had become a constant companion. I observed the settlement from the safety of the trees, watching as the last lamps were extinguished in the homes. The only building still showing light was what appeared to be a small tavern adjacent to the general store. The risk was substantial, but necessity drove me forward. I approached the rear of the general store, moving silently through the shadows. My plan was simple: find water, perhaps take a small amount of food if available, and be gone before dawn. Theft was not in my nature, but survival overrode moral considerations. The store's back door was secured with a simple lock, similar to many I had made over the years. With the small file that had aided my escape, I was able to manipulate the mechanism enough to gain entry. Inside, I moved by feel in the darkness, locating a barrel of water from which I refilled my water skin. Nearby shelves yielded hard bread and salted pork, which I took in modest quantities, hoping the theft would not be immediately noticed. As I prepared to leave, voices approached from the direction of the tavern, men concluding their evening's entertainment by the sound of it. I froze, listening intently. Still no sign of him or Thornton, one was saying. Rewards up to $100 now. For the blacksmith, dead or alive? Another asked. Either. Mrs. Thornton doesn't care, long as he pays for what he did. Their conversation continued as they passed the store, but I had heard enough. News of my escape had spread to neighboring communities, and a substantial reward had been offered. Every white person in the region would be alert for a fugitive matching my description. I slipped out the way I had come, retreating to the safety of the woods before dawn could reveal my presence. The food and water I had obtained would sustain me for a few more days, but the knowledge that I was being actively hunted throughout the region made my situation even more precarious. The next weeks became a blur of constant movement and fear. I traveled primarily at night, using the stars for navigation when visible, relying on instinct when clouds obscured the sky. I avoided settlements when possible, though occasionally necessity forced me to risk approaching isolated farms to steal food or refill my water skin from wells or streams. Twice, I narrowly escaped detection by slave patrols, men on horseback who roamed the countryside specifically looking for fugitives like me. Once I spent an entire day submerged to my neck in a fetid swamp, mosquitoes feasting on the exposed portions of my face as a patrol searched the surrounding area with dogs. The physical toll was immense. I lost weight, my clothes becoming loose on my frame. My feet, unaccustomed to such constant travel, developed blisters that broke and reformed repeatedly. The injuries from Hargrove's interrogation healed slowly, some leaving scars that would mark me for life. But it was the psychological burden that weighed heaviest. The constant vigilance, the need to assess every sound and movement as a potential threat, the loneliness of a journey undertaken in hostile territory where discovery meant capture or death. I began to understand why so many fugitives were recaptured. The stress alone was enough to break one's resolve. After approximately 3 weeks of travel, I estimated I had crossed into North Carolina. The terrain had changed subtly, becoming more hilly, the forests different in composition. I had been fortunate in finding food. Late summer meant berries in the woods, occasional vegetable gardens to quietly harvest from, and streams with fish I could catch with improvised spears. The silver dollars Naomi had provided remained untouched. I was saving them for a time when I might need to pay for passage across a river too wide to swim, or perhaps to bribe someone for information or assistance. In slaveholding states, such opportunities were rare. Few whites would risk helping a fugitive, and those who might were difficult to identify without endangering oneself. It was in North Carolina that I first heard of the Underground Railroad. I had paused near a small farm concealed in the woods, watching as a group of enslaved field hands worked under the supervision of an overseer. Their conversation, carried to me on the breeze, included a whispered reference to the railroad and stations, where fugitives could find help. One man mentioned a Quaker settlement some distance to the northwest, where, it was said, runaway slaves might find sympathetic assistance. The information was vague, perhaps deliberately so, but it was the first hint I'd encountered of an organized network that might aid my journey northward. The decision to seek out this settlement involved considerable risk. It meant deviating from my northward path, potentially into a trap if the information was false or outdated. But the alternative, continuing alone through hundreds more miles of hostile territory, seemed equally daunting. I adjusted my course accordingly, traveling northwest for several days. The terrain became more challenging, the hills steeper, the forests denser. Game was more plentiful here, allowing me to supplement my diet with rabbit and squirrel when I could catch them, though fire was too dangerous to risk except on the coldest nights, meaning much of my meat was consumed raw or dried in the sun. On a crisp autumn evening, approximately a month after my escape, I crested a hill and saw below me a small, neat settlement nestled in a valley. Unlike most communities I had observed from a distance, this one showed no signs of slave quarters or field hands working under supervision. The buildings were modest but well maintained, with a simple meeting house at the center that I guessed might be the Quaker place of worship I had heard mentioned. I watched the settlement for 2 full days before approaching, observing patterns of movement, looking for any sign that it might be unsafe. What I saw was encouraging. Men and women dressed in simple clothing, working together at communal tasks, children playing freely, an atmosphere of quiet industry without the underlying threat of violence that characterized most places I had known. On the 3rd night, I cautiously approached the outermost building, a barn set slightly apart from the other structures. My plan was not to announce myself immediately, but to observe more closely, perhaps finding an opportunity to speak with someone who seemed trustworthy. As I neared the barn, a soft voice spoke from the shadows, startling me so badly I nearly fled. "Friend, thee has traveled far. Would thee accept some food and rest?" An older man stepped into view, his simple clothing and broad-brimmed hat marking him as a Quaker. He carried no weapon, and his hands were open at his sides in a gesture of peace. "How did you know I was here?" I asked, maintaining a safe distance, ready to run if necessary. "We have been expecting someone," he replied simply. "Not thee specifically, but friends to the south sent word that a blacksmith might be traveling this way." I stared in disbelief. "Naomi, she got word to you?" The man smiled gently. "I know not the name, but the message came through those who help others journey to freedom. Will thee come inside? It is safer than talking here." Still cautious, but seeing little alternative, I followed him into the barn. Inside, a lantern burned low, revealing a small table set with bread, cheese, and a pitcher of water. Another person waited there, a woman of similar age to the man, dressed in the same plain style. "I am Elijah," the man said, "and this is my wife, Ruth. We offer thee sanctuary for as long as thee requires it." "Jonas," I replied, the first time I had spoken my name aloud since my escape. I killed a man, my master. They'll be looking for me. I don't know why I made this confession immediately. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the simple human need to unburden myself of the truth I had carried alone for so long. Elijah nodded solemnly. We make no judgment on what necessity drove thee to do. Here, thee will find safety for a time. Ruth gestured to the food. Eat, friend, then rest. Tomorrow is soon enough for decisions about what comes next. The simple meal they offered was the first properly prepared food I had eaten in weeks. As I ate, they explained that their community was a stop on what some called the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses and routes designed to help enslaved people escape to free states and Canada. We can shelter thee for a short time, Elijah explained, then guide thee to the next station northward. The journey is still long and dangerous, but thee need not make it entirely alone. That night I slept on clean straw in a hidden corner of the barn's loft, covered with a warm blanket Ruth had provided. For the first time since my escape, I slept deeply, without waking at every sound, trusting in the protection these strangers had offered. The following days were a time of recovery and planning. I remained hidden within the small Quaker community, moving only between the barn and a root cellar, beneath one of the homes that had been adapted as a hiding place for fugitives. The Quakers brought me food, clean clothing, and information about the routes northward. Virginia will be the most dangerous, Elijah advised during one of our conversations. Though we are sending thee by a western route through the mountains where patrols are fewer, thee must still exercise extreme caution. I learned that I was one of dozens of fugitives they had helped that year alone, part of an increasing exodus as conditions for the enslaved worsened and tensions between North and South grew. Some had families with them, including small children. Others, like me, traveled alone. All carried stories of hardship, all sought the same elusive promise of freedom. During my time with the Quakers, I also shared my skills as a blacksmith, working at night in their small forge to repair tools and create simple items needed by the community. The familiar rhythm of hammer on metal was comforting, a reminder of the craft that had defined my life even in captivity. It was while working at the forge one evening that Ruth brought news that would accelerate my departure. A slave catcher came through the settlement today, she said without preamble, asking questions about a blacksmith from South Carolina. Described thee quite specifically. My heart sank. Did he suspect you of harboring me? No, she assured me. Our community is known for our stance against slavery, but also for our honesty. When asked directly if we had seen thee, Elijah could truthfully say no, as he had not seen thee until after the man departed. Such careful honesty was characteristic of the Quakers, I had learned. They would not lie even to slave catchers, but they found ways to speak truth that protected those under their care. The man had a handbill, Ruth continued, producing a folded paper from her pocket. With thy likeness and a description, the reward has increased. I took the paper, studying the crude woodcut image that bore only a passing resemblance to my actual features. The text described me as Jonas Blacksmith, approximately 40 years of age, responsible for the murder of Alfred Thornton and suspected arson of the Thornton plantation. The reward now stood at $200. They're still searching for me, I said, more to myself than to Ruth, even after all this time. Mrs. Thornton is persistent, by all accounts, Ruth replied. The slave catcher mentioned she has hired several men specifically to find thee, separate from the regular patrols. The news was sobering. I had begun to feel almost safe in the Quaker settlement, had allowed myself to believe the immediate danger might have passed. Now I understood that my journey must continue, and soon. Tomorrow night, Elijah said when Ruth shared the news with him. We've prepared supplies and the next station is expecting thee. A guide will take thee through the mountain passages. That night, as I packed the provisions they had gathered, food, a proper water skin, a small knife, a flint for starting fires, and a crude map sewn into the lining of a new coat, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken, from skilled but enslaved craftsman to fugitive murderer to recipient of kindness from strangers who risked their own freedom to help me secure mine. As promised, a guide arrived the following evening, a young Quaker man named Samuel who knew the mountain paths and had conducted many fugitives through them to the next safe house. The journey will take approximately 5 days, he explained as we prepared to depart. We'll travel by night when possible, but some passages must be navigated by daylight for safety. I said my farewells to Elijah and Ruth, trying to express my gratitude for their kindness and risk-taking on my behalf. Go with clear eyes and a steady heart, Elijah said, clasping my hand firmly. Remember that thy worth as a man comes not from what others declare, but from what thee knows to be true within thyself. The journey through the mountains was arduous, but relatively uneventful. Samuel was an excellent guide, familiar with every trail and hiding place. We avoided patrols easily, though once we had to lie motionless in a thicket for hours as a group of slave catchers passed within yards of our position, their dogs fortunately moving in the wrong direction. When we reached the next station, a farm operated by a free black family named Anderson, Samuel departed, returning to the Quaker settlement. The Andersons welcomed me with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized all my encounters with the Underground Railroad. They too had heard of me, of the reward for my capture, of Mrs. Thornton's determination. You have a choice to make, Marcus Anderson told me on my second night with them. Continue north to Canada, or find a place to disappear closer to home. Is Canada the only true safety? I asked. For someone with a murder charge and a determined pursuer like Mrs. Thornton? Probably, he acknowledged. But there are places even slave catchers hesitate to go. Deep in the mountains, communities of free blacks, Indians, and whites who prefer to live beyond the reach of law and society. His wife, Esther, added, "A man with your skills would be welcomed in such places. A blacksmith can make a life anywhere." The idea was tempting. The journey to Canada was still long and dangerous, and winter would soon make northern travel even more challenging. There a place to stop, to use my skills, to build a life rather than remain forever a fugitive in flight. It offered a different kind of freedom than I had envisioned. After careful consideration, I chose the mountain settlement. Marcus's son, Gabriel, guided me most of the way, leaving me on a ridge overlooking a small valley where perhaps 20 cabins stood scattered along a creek. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved about their daily tasks, a community carved from the wilderness. As I descended into the valley, a man emerged from the trees, tall, muscular, with skin several shades lighter than mine, but clearly of mixed ancestry. He held a rifle casually, but ready for use if needed. "Marcus Anderson sent me," I said, raising my hand slightly. "I'm Jonas, a blacksmith." The man studied me for a long moment, then lowered his rifle slightly. "We heard someone might be coming. Anderson's people sent a runner ahead." He gestured toward the settlement. "Community's been without a smith since old William passed last winter. You any good?" "I am," I replied simply. He nodded, seeming satisfied with my confidence. "I'm Caleb. Come on then. Council will want to meet you." The settlement welcomed me with cautious openness. I was given the previous blacksmith's cabin and forge, and quickly set to work proving my worth through my craft. The forge needed repairs, but soon I was creating tools, horseshoes, hinges, and the 100 other metal items essential to frontier life. I made friends cautiously. Caleb, who had first met me on the ridge, became a frequent visitor to the forge. And there was Leah, a widow with 2 young children, who initially came to have a pot mended and returned with increasingly transparent excuses to spend time in my company. When spring came, a trader brought troubling news. Slave catchers were pushing deeper into the mountains than usual, and the reward for my capture had increased again to $300. That evening, as I walked back to my cabin through fresh snow, Leah fell into step beside me. "You're the blacksmith they're looking for, aren't you?" she asked quietly, her breath fogging in the cold air. I stopped walking, staring at her in alarm. "What makes you say that?" "I was a house slave before I escaped," she replied. "You learn to read people, to notice small things. The way you tensed when the trader mentioned South Carolina." She touched my arm gently. "I'm not judging you, Jonas. We've all done what we had to do to survive." After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "Yes, I killed my master. He was going to sell a young girl to a breeding farm. After she'd already been..." I couldn't finish the sentence. Leah's expression softened with understanding. "You don't need to explain, but if they're hunting you specifically with professional slave catchers, you might not be safe here indefinitely. What would you have me do? Keep running forever?" "No," she said firmly. "This is your home now. We protect our own here. I'm just saying, be prepared, in case they come." Her warning, kindly meant, disturbed my hard-won peace. That night I dreamed of Thornton rising from the creek, where I had disposed of his body, following me through the mountains, his face bloated and distorted, but his eyes still recognizably filled with the same contempt they had held in life. The community strengthened its watches after the traders' warning. No stranger could approach the settlement without being observed long before they arrived. For weeks, nothing unusual occurred, and I began to hope that perhaps the slave catchers had found easier prey elsewhere. It was on a bright June morning, nearly 8 months after my escape from the Thornton plantation, that everything changed. I was at the forge working on a new plow blade when Caleb burst through the door. "Riders coming up the valley," he said without preamble. 6 men, armed, dogs with them. My heart froze. "Slave catchers," he nodded grimly. "Looking for you, most likely. We've prepared for this. There's a hiding place in the root cellar behind the meeting house." But as we hurried through the settlement, it became clear we were too late. The riders had already entered the valley, moving faster than anticipated. I caught sight of them as we crossed between cabins, hard-faced men on sturdy mountain horses, rifles across their saddles, several dogs straining at leashes. The lead rider's gaze swept across the clearing and locked on me. For a moment we stared at each other across the distance, hunter and quarry each recognizing the other for what they were. "Run!" Caleb shouted, raising his rifle. "To the forge!" I ran, abandoning the plan for the root cellar. Behind me I heard shouts and the thunder of hooves as the riders urged their mounts forward. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering a post as I passed. I reached the forge door and dove inside, grabbing a heavy hammer from its place on the wall. Positioning myself beside the door, I waited, heart pounding as the riders reached the forge. "Jonas!" a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out peacefully, and no one else needs to get hurt." I remained silent, weighing my options. The forge had only one door and a small window too narrow for escape. "Mrs. Thornton wants you alive," the voice continued. "The reward's good either way, but she's offering a bonus for bringing you back breathing. Seems she has some special plans for making an example of you." I heard movement outside, the men positioning themselves around the forge. Then footsteps approached the door cautiously. "Last chance to come out on your own," the voice warned. "After this, we do it the hard way." When I didn't respond, the door burst open. A man entered, young and impetuous, pistol extended before him. I swung the hammer with all my strength, aiming for his arm. The heavy metal head connected with a sickening crunch. He screamed, the pistol falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Shots immediately followed, bullets tearing through the wooden walls. I dropped to the floor, crawling toward the back where the stone chimney offered better protection. "Hold your fire," someone shouted. "You'll kill him and we'll lose half the reward." A tense silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, I heard new gunfire from elsewhere in the settlement. The community was fighting back, creating a diversion. I moved quickly to the forge itself, thrusting an iron poker into the banked coals and working the bellows frantically. Within minutes, the tip glowed red-hot. Not an ideal weapon, but better than nothing. The sounds of conflict had spread throughout the settlement, shouts, occasional gunfire, the panicked whinnying of horses. The slave catchers who had surrounded the forge appeared to have been drawn away to deal with the unexpected resistance. I eased the door open slightly, peering out. The clearing was momentarily empty. If I could reach the trees beyond the last row of cabins, I might escape while the slave catchers were occupied. I pushed the door wider and stepped out, the glowing poker held ready in one hand, the hammer in the other. I had taken only a few steps when a voice rang out. "There he is!" I turned to see one of the slave catchers emerging from between cabins, rifle raised. I charged directly at him, zagging unpredictably. The man fired, the bullet whistling past. Before he could reload, I was upon him, driving the heated metal into his thigh. He screamed, dropping the rifle. But the exchange had drawn attention. 2 more slave catchers appeared, converging on my position. As the first closed in, a shot rang out from somewhere to my right. The man jerked in his saddle, then toppled sideways. I turned to see Caleb emerging from between cabins, rifle still raised, already reloading. "The others?" I asked urgently. "2 down, 1 running," he replied. "Sarah and the women have the children safe. Come on, we need to move before they regroup." We made our way quickly through the settlement, staying close to buildings for cover. The sounds of conflict had diminished. Either the fighting was over or the remaining slave catchers had withdrawn. "Where are we going?" I asked as Caleb led me toward the river. "Getting you out of here," he answered grimly. "They came for you specifically. Had your description, knew you were a blacksmith. Someone talked somewhere along your journey here." We reached the river, swollen with spring melt. A small flat-bottomed boat was concealed among the reeds. containing a pack of supplies and a rifle wrapped in oilcloth. Downstream about 5 miles, there's a fork, Caleb explained quickly. Take the eastern branch. It leads to a trading post run by a Cherokee family who are friends to the settlement. They'll guide you further north. And if they find this boat? Caleb shrugged. Boat could have been stolen. Either way, better they follow you than remain here searching. I hesitated, reluctant to leave. Leah and her children will be fine, Caleb assured me, but you need to go now before the remaining hunters gather their wounded and return in force. As if to emphasize his point, shouts erupted from the direction of the central clearing. Time had run out. With a nod of gratitude, I clasped Caleb's hand, then stepped into the boat. He pushed it away from the bank, into the current that would carry me away from the place that had briefly been home. Thank you, I called softly as the distance between us grew. For everything. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, then disappeared back into the trees. I turned my attention to guiding the craft, using a pole to keep it from capsizing in the swift current. The journey downriver was perilous. Twice I nearly capsized in rapids, saved only by luck and the boat's sturdy construction. By nightfall, I reached the fork Caleb had mentioned, taking the eastern branch as instructed. The current was gentler here, allowing me to pole more slowly, conserving my strength. It was near midnight when I spotted a faint light ahead, the trading post. As I approached, a figure emerged from the main building, a woman of Cherokee descent, watching my approach with cautious interest. You must be Jonas, she called, as I maneuvered the boat alongside a small dock. Caleb sent a runner ahead to warn us, and others might be following. Relief flooded through me. They have dogs, I said as I secured the boat. Tracking dogs, they can't be far behind. The woman nodded grimly. Come inside. My husband and son are preparing. The trading family took me in, fed me, and then hid me as the slave catchers arrived hours later. From my hiding place beneath the floorboards, I heard them questioning the family, who steadfastly denied seeing anyone matching my description. Eventually, frustrated and suspicious, but unable to prove anything, the slave catchers continued their search elsewhere. The next day, the family's son guided me deeper into the mountains, to paths so remote and difficult that dogs would struggle to follow. We traveled for 3 days before reaching another sanctuary, a small cabin occupied by an elderly white man known only as the Doctor, who had spent decades helping fugitives. Canada is still the safest option, he advised after hearing my story, but winter in the mountains is harsh and dangerous. You could stay here until spring, then continue north when the pass is clear. I accepted his offer gratefully. The months that followed were a time of recovery and reflection. I helped the doctor with his work, which included both medical treatment for local communities and assistance to other fugitives passing through. From him, I learned rudimentary reading and writing, skills forbidden to me as a slave but essential for a truly free man. When spring came again, I faced another choice: continue to Canada as planned, or return to the mountain settlement I had come to think of as home. The risk remained substantial. Professional slave catchers had long memories, and Mrs. Thornton's vengeance seemed tireless, but my heart pulled me back toward Leah, her children, and the community that had fought to protect me. The choice is yours, the doctor said when I shared my dilemma. Freedom isn't just about safety. It's about living a life worth the risks. I never told the doctor my final decision. Some said I continued north to Canada, disappearing into the growing communities of free blacks in Toronto or Montreal. Others claimed I returned to the mountain settlement, perhaps living there for years, until slave catchers came again, forcing another flight into the wilderness. The most persistent rumor suggested that I made my way west to territories where a skilled blacksmith with no questions about his past could build a new identity far from the reach of Mrs. Thornton's hatred. Whatever path I chose, the blade I had forged in secret, the blade that had ended Thornton's life and set these events in motion, remained hidden in the wall of the Thornton Plantation Forge, a silent witness to one man's desperate bid for justice and freedom. Long after the Civil War ended slavery, long after Mrs. Thornton and all who had known me were dust, that blade remained, perhaps to be discovered someday by hands that would never know its story or the price paid for the freedom we take for granted. This was the story of Jonas, the blacksmith of South Carolina. Some say he was eventually captured and executed for his crime. Others claim he lived out his days in that mountain community, raising a family with Leah and teaching his craft to her son and other children. The most persistent legend tells that years later, when slave catchers again ventured into the mountains, they found only an abandoned settlement and a cold forge, the community having vanished deeper into the wilderness, taking their blacksmith with them. Whatever his ultimate fate, the blade he forged became a symbol to those who heard his story, a reminder that even in the darkest bondage, the human spirit seeks the heat and light of freedom, and that sometimes liberty must be hammered from the raw metal of oppression, no matter the cost. The echoes of Jonas's defiance resonate through time, a stark reminder of the brutal fight for freedom. If these untold stories of resistance and survival stir your soul, join our community. Subscribe to our channel to uncover more hidden truths from the shadows of American slavery. Your support helps us keep these powerful narratives alive.